Welcome to Science Pills. Imagine a patient for a second. A patient with a completely severed spinal cord.
Right. Catastrophic injury.
Exactly. We are talking about a total physical disconnect between the brain and the lower half of the body. Medical science, basic anatomy, just common sense, all tell us that communication across that gap is entirely impossible.
The main highway is broken.
Right, the spine is broken. Yet, functional MRI scans have revealed something that just completely shatters that assumption. When this specific patient achieves an orgasm through vaginocervical self-stimulation, the brain's pleasure centers literally light up on the scan.
It is genuinely incredible to see that on a brain scan.
It is, and you have to ask, how is that possible? If the main highway, the spine, is physically severed, how is the signal getting up to the brain?
Well, it happens because there is a biological backdoor.
A back door.
Yeah, a massive hidden fiber optic cable that bypasses the spine entirely. It operates completely off the grid of our standard nervous system.
Which is just wild to think about. And if you are joining us today, I want you to know this isn't just a generic overview. This is a custom-tailored journey designed specifically for you and your desire to learn efficiently and thoroughly. We are setting a deeply curious, serious, and aesthetic tone today because the mission ahead of us is profound. We are taking a deep dive into the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve.
Also known as the pacemaker for the brain.
The pacemaker for the brain. It is quite literally the biological superhighway connecting your mind and your body, and we are going to explore exactly how it governs the human experience.
And it is a phenomenal biological reality. To truly understand it, we aren't just going to list off a bunch of dry anatomical facts.
No, nobody wants a textbook reading.
Right. We are going to synthesize exactly why this single nerve is fundamentally revolutionizing our understanding of stress, disease, trauma, and really just human resilience in general.
Yeah, we have a massive stack of sources to go through today.
We do. We will be looking at everything from comprehensive historical reviews, cutting-edge clinical trial data on treatment-resistant depression and epilepsy, to the deeply complex brain-gut axis. We even have the latest 2026 data on non-invasive biohacking wearables.
So the goal is to move beyond the textbook and understand the mechanics of our own biology. Okay, let's unpack this. If we're talking about a superhighway, we need to understand the physical infrastructure first.
Right, the geography of it.
Yeah. Imagine the vagus nerve as this massive, wet, pulsating fiber optic cable running through the very center of human existence. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is this nerve, and where is it actually going?
So the vagus nerve is cranial nerve X. It's the 10th of 12 cranial nerves. And what makes cranial nerves unique is that they emerge directly from the brain.
Like straight out of the brainstem.
Exactly, right out of the brainstem, rather than branching off from the spinal cord like most nerves do.
Okay, and the name itself, vagus, that means something specific, right?
It does. The word vagus comes from Latin, meaning wandering. So think of words like vagabond or vagrant.
The wanderer.
Yeah, and it is the absolute perfect name because this nerve is the ultimate wanderer. It has an incredibly massive meandering path through the body.
Where does it start?
It originates deep in the medulla oblongata of the brainstem, that it exits the skull and travels down through the neck. Specifically, it runs within something called the carotid sheath.
So it's packed in there with all the major blood vessels.
Right alongside your carotid artery and your jugular vein. It's very protected. From the neck, it continues down into the thorax, branching out to touch the heart and the lungs.
Wow.
And then it burrows deep, deep into the abdomen. It wraps its tendrils around the stomach, the intestines, the liver, the spleen, and even the kidneys.
You know, I was looking at some archaic medical texts from our sources, and they used to call it the pneumogastric nerve, which, sounds like a steampunk band.
It really does.
But it actually makes perfect sense when you break down the etymology. You have pneumo for the lungs and gastric for the stomach. It's regulating both of those massive systems simultaneously.
Precisely. Early anatomists recognized that dual regulation right away. They saw it touching the pulmonary and gastric systems and just named it functionally.
Makes sense.
But to truly understand the modern conception of the vagus nerve, we have to look at the traffic on this fiber optic cable.
The data flow.
Exactly. We have to look at the direction the data is flowing. This is where we find a crucial paradigm-shifting split. It's an 80-20 split.
Okay, break that down for me.
80% of the fibers in the vagus nerve are afferent. That means they are sensory fibers carrying data from the body's internal organs up to the brain.
Up to the brain?
Right. Only 20% are efferent, meaning motor or parasympathetic fibers, sending commands from the brain down to the body.
Hold on, I want to pause right there because that flips everything I thought I knew about biology totally upside down.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
Because we always picture the brain as the CEO barking orders down to the body, like heart, beat faster, lungs, breathe deeper, stomach, digest.
Top-down model.
Yeah. But if 80% of this nerve is sending signals up, is the brain actually more like a customer service rep? Like just frantically responding to an endless stream of complaints and updates from the stomach and lungs?
You know, what's fascinating here is that your customer service analogy is highly accurate, perhaps even more than you realize. The brain is doing far more listening to the body than it is talking to it.
That is just wild.
There's actually a clinical term for this. This concept is called interoception, which is the brain's perception of the internal state of the body.
Interoception. Okay.
The vagus nerve is the primary conduit of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the system responsible for the rest and digest state.
As opposed to the fight or flight state.
Right. It acts as the ultimate reset button against the sympathetic nervous system, which drives that adrenaline response.
So it's calming us down.
Yes, but because 80% of the nerve is purely sensory, your brain's perception of how safe or threatened you are at any given moment is largely dictated by the physical state of your internal organs. And that state is constantly being relayed upward by the vagus nerve.
So let me get this straight. If my gut is tense or my breathing is shallow, the vagus nerve isn't necessarily telling my gut to relax. My gut is actually telling my brain, hey, we are in danger down here.
Exactly.
And then my brain creates the feeling of anxiety to match what the gut is doing physically.
It's exactly the reverse of how we typically think about it. We usually think, I am stressed, therefore my stomach is in knots.
Right.
But biology suggests it's often my stomach is in knots, therefore my vagus nerve is sending a high-frequency alarm signal to my brainstem. And then my brain constructs the emotion of stress to explain the physical data it's receiving.
Wow. That completely changes how you view a panic attack.
It does. And this is why that fMRI study on women with complete spinal cord injuries is so vital.
Oh, one from the intro?
Yes. It proves that the vagus nerve is an entirely separate, robust communication highway that operates completely independently of the spinal cord.
Because the spine is physically cut.
Right. The physical sensation of an orgasm can bypass the severed spine because it travels up the vagus nerve directly into the brainstem. The body has a direct line to the brain that cannot be severed simply by breaking the back.
A literal biological backdoor. It's just incredible. So if this nerve has so much power over our physical and emotional states, how did humanity figure out that we could actually manipulate it?
Well,
Because if you have a cable this powerful, someone is going to try to hack it. And looking at this historical timeline in our sources, the early attempts to do this were, frankly, a bit terrifying.
oh, they absolutely were. The history of vagal stimulation definitely does not begin in a sterile, modern surgical suite with highly calibrated computers.
No, not at all.
It begins in the 1880s in New York with a neurologist named J.L. Corning.
This is the tuning fork guy. It paints such a wild, almost gothic visual of early neurology.
It really is a striking image.
A guy in a Victorian suit pressing a tuning fork into someone's neck. What was Corning actually trying to achieve back in 1884?
So Corning was attempting to treat severe epileptic seizures. At the time, the neurological understanding of what caused a seizure was highly speculative, to say the least.
They were just guessing.
Pretty much. One prevailing theory was that seizures were caused by an excessive rush of blood to the brain, a condition they called hypereumia.
Okay, so too much blood equals seizure.
That was the thought. So Corning's approach was to apply a vibrating tuning fork directly to the patient's neck, specifically right over the carotid sheath where the vagus nerve runs.
So he's vibrating their neck.
Yes. And while he was holding the vibrating metal to the neck, he was simultaneously applying heavy manual compression to the carotid artery.
Oh my God.
It was a crude mechanical attempt to stimulate the nerve and simultaneously choke off the blood flow to the brain.
Wait, he was literally choking them while vibrating their neck? Did he think the sound waves were doing something magical, or was it purely physical pressure?
It was primarily about mechanical vibration, what we now call mechanotransduction. He believed the vibration of the tuning.
And then the timeline goes kind of quiet for a while until we get to the 1930s and 40s. Here, scientists are using animal studies, specifically cats and monkeys, to look at brain waves.
The EEG studies, yes.
Right. They proved that if you dissect out the vagus nerve and stimulate it with actual electricity, you actually alter the EEG patterns in the animal's brain.
Yes, the mid-20th century provided the raw electrical proof. Researchers were observing that peripheral electrical stimulation in the neck was actively desynchronizing and synchronizing electrical activity deep in the cerebral cortex.
Without even opening the head.
Exactly. They were proving that you could change the brain without opening the skull. But the true modern paradigm shift, the moment everything changed, occurred in the 1980s with a researcher named Jay Zabara.
Oh, this is the part. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Zabra developed what he termed an implantable neurocybernetic prosthesis.
It's a great phrase.
It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi novel. He was working with canines, right?
Yes, he was doing canine studies. Zabara's pivotal work demonstrated that repetitive electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve could inhibit experimentally induced seizures in dogs.
So he's inducing seizures and then stopping them.
Right. He essentially created a rudimentary pacemaker, hooked it to the dog's vagus nerve, and proved that a specific rhythm of electrical pulses could stop a seizure dead in its tracks.
But canine neuroanatomy and human neuroanatomy are vastly different. How did we cross the bridge from stopping seizures in dogs to suddenly putting these cybernetic implants into the necks of human beings?
It was a big leap.
Was the medical community just ready to start slicing into the carotid sheath?
Well, the medical community was desperate. In the realm of severe refractory epilepsy, meaning seizures that simply do not respond to any available medication, the existing surgical options were brutal.
What were they doing before this?
They involved craniotomies, literally opening the skull and resecting or cutting out pieces of the brain where the seizures were originating.
So literally removing brain tissue.
Yes. So Zabara's canine work was so compelling because it offered an alternative that didn't require brain surgery.
That's massive.
It offered peripheral neuromodulation. You could tap into the vagus nerve in the neck, which is a relatively simple surgery, and let the nerve carry the therapeutic signal up into the brain on its own.
Which ushers in the modern era of the pacemaker for the brain. Let's dive deep into the actual procedure of invasive vagus nerve stimulation, or IVNS.
Okay.
If I am a patient in the 1990s going in for this, what exactly is the surgeon doing to my body?
The mechanics of invasive VNS are remarkably similar to a traditional cardiac pacemaker, but the destination of the wiring is obviously different.
Right.
A surgeon makes an incision in the upper chest, usually on the left side, and implants a small titanium pulse generator just under the skin. It's roughly the size of a stopwatch.
So like a thick coin.
Yeah. Then they make a second incision in the lower neck. They tunnel microscopic lead wires under the skin from the chest, over the collarbone up to the neck. Once they expose the vagus nerve within the carotid sheath, they wrap what are called helical electrodes around the nerve.
Helical, so like tiny coiled springs. Why not just stitch the wire directly to the nerve?
Because the vagus nerve is a living, moving, pulsating structure.
Oh, right. It's right next to the artery.
Exactly. If you just tied a rigid wire to it, the mechanical friction of the patient moving their neck, or even just swallowing, would eventually crush the nerve or snap the wire.
That sounds terrible.
It would be. So the helical coils wrap gently around the nerve, sort of like a telephone cord, allowing it to flex and pulse naturally while maintaining direct electrical contact.
Very clever engineering.
Once it's all connected, the generator in the chest is programmed to send regular, mild electrical pulses, usually a burst of electricity for 30 seconds every 5 minutes, through the nerve and directly up into the brainstem.
And what does that actually feel like for the patient? 30 seconds of electricity every 5 minutes sounds intense to live with.
Well, most patients acclimate to it pretty quickly. They typically feel a mild tingling sensation in their neck when it fires.
Oh, the vibration.
Yeah. However, because the vagus nerve also regulates the larynx and the lungs, a very common side effect during that 30-second stimulation phase is a slight alteration in their voice.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, their voice might become hoarse or trembly, or they might experience a mild sensation of breathlessness, known clinically as dyspnea.
So every 5 minutes, your voice gets a little raspy for 30 seconds.
Exactly.
That is wild. So this technology gets officially approved by the FDA in 1997 for refractory epilepsy. But the most fascinating part of the story isn't the epilepsy treatment itself. It's the serendipity of what happened next.
Yes.
While they were treating these epilepsy patients, something entirely unexpected happened with their overall psychology, didn't it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of psychiatric medicine, It is genuinely one of the most important happy accidents in modern clinical history.
A happy accident. I love that.
During the massive epilepsy trials in the late 90s, the clinical investigators noticed a profound secondary effect. The patients were reporting significant, sometimes life-altering improvements in their mood and overall effect.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
If I suffered from debilitating daily seizures and you put a device in my chest that stopped them, of course my mood is going to improve. I would be ecstatic.
It's a very logical assumption.
So how did they know the electricity was actually fixing depression rather than the patients just being relieved that their epilepsy was cured?
That is exactly the question the researchers asked, and it's why they went back into the data. When they analyzed the outcomes, they found that the mood improvements were occurring independently of the seizure reduction.
Oh, really?
Yes. There was a subset of patients whose epilepsy did not respond well to the VNS. They were still having seizures just as frequently. Yet their clinical depression was lifting. The electrical stimulation was exerting a primary independent effect on the emotional centers of the brain, regardless of what the seizures were doing.
That observation is what ultimately led to the FDA approving VNS for treatment-resistant depression, or TRD, in 2005.
A huge milestone.
But the clinical data around depression is notoriously messy. I want to look closely at the Restore Life trial from our sources. This was a massive one-year, sham-controlled trial with 493 adults suffering from severe TRD.
The Restore Life trial is an absolute cornerstone for understanding the deep nuances of how VNS actually functions in the real world. And it perfectly illustrates why treating depression is so incredibly complex.
So let's set the stage. Who are these patients?
We need to clearly define the population first. Treatment-resistant depression means these patients have failed to respond to multiple sequential courses of different antidepressant medications.
So they've tried everything.
Everything. Many have failed cognitive behavioral therapy, and a significant portion have even failed electroconvulsive therapy, what used to be called shock therapy.
Wow.
This is a population that has essentially been told by modern medicine that they are out of options.
So they enroll almost 500 of these patients, put the implants in, and then measure the results. But the way they measured it is where things get really controversial.
They're controversial.
The primary endpoint of the trial, the main test they used to decide if the device worked, was something called the MADRS. What is that?
So MADRS stands for the Montgomery-Åsberg Depression Rating Scale.
Okay.
It is a clinician-rated scale. A psychiatrist sits down with the patient, asks them a highly standardized set of questions about their sadness, tension, sleep, and appetite, and then scores them based on the answers.
It's basically a very rigid questionnaire.
Yes, it is designed to be highly objective. And here's the shocking part of the Restore Life trial. When looking strictly at that primary MADRS endpoint over the course of the first year, there was not a statistically significant difference between the active VNS group and the sham group.
The sham group being the placebo group whose devices were implanted but turned off.
Exactly.
Wait, so the main test failed?
Technically, yes.
The FDA-approved device didn't beat the placebo on the primary clinical scale. That sounds like a massive red flag for the entire therapy. How is this considered an effective treatment?
This raises an incredibly important question about how we measure the resolution of deep, chronic treatment-resistant depression. While the rigid clinician-rated NARs didn't show the required statistical separation at year 1, the secondary endpoints told a profoundly different story.
The secondary endpoints being the other tests they ran.
Exactly. The tests that measure how the patient actually feels about their own life.
Let's break those down. What were the secondary endpoints?
They used the Clinical Global Impression Improvement Scale, or CGI-I. And they also used both the self-reported and clinician-rated Quick Inventory of Depressive Symptomatology, the QISR and QISC.
Okay, alphabet soup. What's the takeaway there?
The key difference here is the self-reporting aspect. When you evaluate the data through the lens of the patient's own daily experience, the results significantly favored the active VNS group.
So the patients felt better, even if the doctor's clipboard said they shouldn't?
Yes. Specifically, patients on active VNS spent significantly more time in what is called a partial response.
Define partial response, because it sounds like you're saying they didn't get totally better.
A partial response is clinically defined as a symptom improvement of 30% or more.
30%, okay.
And you're correct. They did not experience a miraculous 100% remission of all symptoms. But we really have to contextualize this.
Right, because of who the patients are.
Exactly. When you are dealing with a patient who has been deeply suicidally depressed for a decade, who has failed every medication on earth, achieving a sustained 30% improvement is not a failure.
No, not at all.
It is a monumental lifeline. It is the difference between being unable to get out of bed and being able to hold down a job or interact with your children.
That makes so much sense.
Severely depressed patients might still score poorly on a rigid clinical scale like the MADRs because they still have symptoms. But personally, on the QDS-SR, they report feeling a 30% improvement in their daily will to live.
Right. A doctor might look at you and say, well, you still have insomnia and low appetite, so you fail the test. But the patient's saying, yeah, but I don't want to die today, so the device is working.
Exactly. It isn't a silver bullet, but it provides a biological foundation of stability that allows these patients to engage with life and therapy again.
It gives them a floor.
Yes, and long-term follow-up studies over 5 years show that the benefits of VNS actually compound over time, which is unlike medications, which often lose their efficacy as you build a tolerance.
Before we move off the surgery itself, there is a fascinating anatomical quirk in the data about how they implant this.
Oh, the side they choose.
Yeah, they always wrap the wire around the left vagus nerve in the neck. Why never the right? The nerve exists on both sides, right?
Yes, the vagus nerve is bilateral. You have a left trunk and a right trunk. But choosing the left side for psychiatric and neurological conditions is a highly specific, critical safety parameter.
Safety parameter, why?
Anatomy dictates this. The right cervical vagus nerve heavily innervates the sinoatrial node of the heart.
Sinoatrial node, that's the heart's natural pacemaker, right? The cluster of cells that tells the heart to beat.
Correct. So if you send 30 seconds of constant electrical pulsing down the right vagus nerve, you carry a very high risk of inducing severe cardiac complications.
Like what?
Specifically bradycardia, a dangerous slowing of the heart rate, or even temporarily stopping the heart altogether.
Okay, so we definitely avoid the right side.
Therefore, for neurological conditions like epilepsy and depression, surgeons exclusively use the left vagus nerve. The left side has much less direct influence on the heart's pacemaker.
Though it's worth noting from the sources that researchers are currently running clinical trials using right-sided VNS specifically as a treatment for heart failure.
Right, using the electricity to intentionally slow down and protect an overworked heart.
Which is brilliant, but let's stick to the brain for now. I am still stuck on the geography of how this actually cures depression.
Okay.
You are tapping into the left side of the neck to fix a mood disorder in the brain. It's like fixing a glitchy computer monitor by wiggling the power cable in the basement.
It does seem disconnected.
If the electricity is just going up the neck, how is it actually curing depression in the cortex? What is the chemical translation of these electrical shocks?
To understand the translation of raw electricity into complex neurochemistry, we have to follow the signal's journey physically into the brain.
Let's trace it.
When that electrical pulse leaves the titanium generator in the chest and travels up the left vagus nerve, it crosses into the skull. Its first major destination in the brainstem is a specific bundle of neurons called the nucleus tractus solitarius.
The NTS.
Yes, the NTS.
The literature describes this area almost like Grand Central Station.
That is the absolute perfect analogy. The NTS is the primary relay station. The electrical pulse arrives at the NTS on the vagus train, so to speak.
Okay, the train pulls into the station, then what?
But the NTS doesn't just hold the signal. It acts as a distribution hub. From the NTS, the signal is projected out to 3 distinct major manufacturing centers deep within the brain.
Let's trace all 3 lines out of Grand Central. Where does the first signal go?
The first projection goes to the locus coeruleus.
Locus coeruleus.
This tiny area is the brain's primary factory for producing norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine, what does that do?
Norepinephrine is crucial for arousal, alertness, and cognitive focus. When you are severely depressed, your locus coeruleus is often underactive, leaving you feeling lethargic and enveloped in brain fog. VNS literally shocks it back into production.
Okay, the norepinephrine line wakes you up. Where is the second signal going?
The second projection goes to the Raphe nucleus.
Raphe nucleus.
This is the big one for psychiatry. The Raphe nucleus is the primary site of serotonin production.
Serotonin, the classic mood chemical.
Yes, the key neurotransmitter for mood regulation, emotional stability, and general well-being. This is the exact chemical that drugs like Prozac or Zoloft target.
And the third line out of Grand Central?
The third signal hits the pedunculopontine nucleus.
That is a mouthful.
It is. The pedunculopontine nucleus produces acetylcholine, which is vital for learning, memory, and attention.
So let me just get this straight. Instead of taking an SSRI pill that floods the entire body and the entire brain with synthetic serotonin from the outside, VNS is using a targeted electrical pulse to kickstart the brain's own natural factories from the inside.
That is the profound elegance of neuromodulation. It is a true bottom-up approach to psychiatric treatment.
Bottom up instead of top down.
By stimulating the vagus nerve, you are essentially forcing the brainstem to pump out a beautifully balanced, natural cocktail of serotonin, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. And it's delivered exactly where the brain naturally needs them.
That is just incredible.
But the mechanism of magic doesn't stop with just neurotransmitters.
There's more.
Yes, VNS also triggers a genetic response. It causes the upregulation of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
Oh, BDNF. I've heard neuroscientists call this miracle grow for the brain. It's the protein that promotes neuroplasticity, right?
That's exactly right. When your brain is flooded with stress hormones like cortisol for years on end, the physical structures of the brain, specifically the dendrites, which are the branches that connect neurons, they literally shrink and wither.
The brain gets damaged by the stress.
It becomes rigid, stuck. BDNF reverses this. It allows the brain to grow new neural connections, branch out, and physically adapt again. And this leads us to some of the most exciting clinical evidence we have right now. VNS has been shown to enhance the extinction of conditioned fear.
Fear extinction, that sounds incredibly relevant to PTSD. Walk me through exactly how neuroplasticity and fear extinction work together on a cellular level.
Imagine a veteran with PTSD who hears a car backfire and immediately drops to the ground.
Right.
Their brain has conditioned the link between a loud noise and a life-threatening reality. In traditional exposure therapy, you try to uncouple that link by exposing them to loud noises in a safe environment, hoping they learn it's safe.
But it doesn't always work.
Exactly, because in a brain ravaged by trauma, neuroplasticity is very low. The brain refuses to learn the new, safe association. It's physically stuck in the fear loop.
So how does VNS fix that?
When you introduce vagus nerve stimulation during therapy, you do two things. First, you flood the brain with calming neurotransmitters to lower the immediate panic. And second, you spike those BDNF levels.
The miracle grow.
Yes. The BDNF provides the biological environment that allows the neurons to literally forge new physical pathways. The patient gains the biological ability to rewrite the traumatic memory.
So they forget the trauma.
No, they don't forget the trauma.
Oh.
But they extinguish the visceral physical fear response attached to it. They can finally unlearn the deeply ingrained sympathetic nervous system overdrive.
Man. So what does this all mean for our fundamental philosophy of mental health? We are treating severe psychiatric disorders, deep depression, complex PTSD by treating the body first.
Yes.
We are literally plugging a battery into a nerve in the chest to cure the mind. Does this completely validate the idea that trauma is stored in the body, not just the mind?
It provides robust, empirical, undeniable validation for that exact concept. The mind and the body cannot be separated in the context of trauma.
They are a single unit.
The physiological state of the body, relayed via the vagus nerve, dictates the emotional reality of the brain. If your gut, your heart, and your lungs are tense, the vagus nerve is transmitting a constant state of threat.
Regardless of what you're thinking about.
Right. The brain will remain depressed or anxious, regardless of how much cognitive talk therapy you do, because the incoming data from the body says, we are not safe.
That feeling of constant threat doesn't just affect our mood, it literally destroys our tissues. It inflames our entire system.
It does. Systemic inflammation.
Which brings us to a massive breakthrough in how we understand the vagus nerve's role in the immune system. We need to talk about the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway.
This is the frontier where the vagus nerve transitions from a neurological marvel to a master immunological switch.
An immune switch. Explain that.
Well, for a long time, immunology and neurology were treated as entirely separate fields.
Okay.
But in the late 90s and early 2000s, researchers discovered an anatomical reflex arc.
Okay.
They found that vagus nerve stimulation activates the release of acetylcholine, not just in the brain like we talked about, but in the periphery, specifically targeting the spleen and other immune organs.
Wait, how does a neurotransmitter like acetylcholine interact with the immune system down in the spleen?
The acetylcholine binds directly to specialized receptors on macrophages.
Macrophages. Those are the foot soldiers of your immune system, right? The white blood cells.
Yes. When the acetylcholine docks onto these immune cells, it acts as a molecular kill switch. It explicitly tells the macrophages to stop producing inflammatory cytokines.
Cytokines. Those are the chemical messengers that cause systemic inflammation, right? Like interleukin-6 and interferon gamma, which we know spike dramatically when a person is under chronic psychological stress.
Correct. When you are under chronic stress, your body mistakenly believes you are under physical attack, so it pumps out these inflammatory cytokines to prepare for an injury.
But there's no injury. You're just stressed about an email.
Exactly. But because there is no physical wound, this response just leads to chronic systemic inflammation, and that damages the heart, the joints, and the brain.
So how does the vagus nerve stop it?
The cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway is the vagus nerve acting as the biological brake pedal. By releasing acetylcholine directly into the immune organs, the vagus nerve physically blocks the production of these stress-induced inflammatory markers. You avoid the cytokine storm.
It's like the vagus nerve is a biological fire hose. When the body is on fire with stress-induced inflammation, the vagus nerve sprays acetylcholine to put out the fire.
That's a great way to visualize it.
And nowhere is this fire more relevant or more volatile than in the stomach. Let's explore the brain-gut axis, because the anatomical literature states that the vagus nerve is the physical bridge between the brain and the enteric nervous system, the ENS.
We truly cannot overstate the complexity of the enteric nervous system.
That brain.
Yes. It is an absolutely vast, intricate web of neurons embedded within the lining of your gastrointestinal tract. It actually contains more neurons than the entire spinal cord.
More neurons than the spine.
Yes, which is exactly why neurogastroenterologists frequently refer to it as the second brain. And the vagus nerve serves as the exclusive high-speed fiber optic hotline connecting the skull brain to this gut brain.
And this gut brain isn't just mechanically digesting food, right? It's producing its own chemistry. The data notes that the ENS produces over 30 different neurotransmitters.
Yes. For example, the vast majority of your body's serotonin, up to 90%, is actually produced in the gut, not the brain.
90%.
But what is truly groundbreaking in recent years is understanding how the gut microbiota, the trillions of bacteria living in your digestive tract, utilize the vagus nerve to communicate.
Okay, stop right there. How do microscopic bacteria talk to a human nerve? They aren't connected.
No, but they communicate chemically. The bacteria in your gut produce metabolites, short-chain fatty acids, and neuroactive compounds as they break down your food.
Okay, chemical byproducts.
These chemical byproducts physically interact with the afferent sensory fibers of the vagus nerve that are embedded in the gut lining.
The 80% of sensory fibers we talked about.
Exactly. The vagus nerve senses this chemical environment and relays the information, essentially giving a status report on your gut bacteria directly up to the emotional and cognitive centers of the brain.
So the bacteria are sending a report card to the brain.
The microbiome is literally shaping your mood and anxiety levels based on what you feed it.
So let's tie this all together. If your gut is inflamed, say, from a highly processed diet or a massive spike in cortisol from chronic stress, the bacteria shift.
Right, the microbiome gets disrupted.
The inflammation damages the tissue. The vagus nerve senses this tissue damage and sends literal smoke signals up to the NTS in the brainstem. The brain interprets those signals of physical distress, and the resulting psychological output is clinical depression.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally changes the paradigm of modern psychiatry.
It really does.
Depression might not just be a chemical imbalance in the brain. It is increasingly viewed by researchers as an inflammatory disease of the body.
The fire is in the basement, but the smoke is filling the attic.
I love that. And there are direct clinical applications here. Because of the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway, VNS is being actively explored in clinical trials right now as a treatment for inflammatory bowel disease, like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis.
Treating the gut with the nerve.
Exactly. By using the vagus nerve to turn down the localized inflammatory response in the gut, we can heal the gastrointestinal tissue while simultaneously elevating the mood in the brain.
Okay, I am completely sold on the power of this nerve. But here is my pushback for you.
Let's hear it.
If this is so incredibly effective, if we can use this biological fire hose to cure depression, stop severe seizures, and put out cytokine fires in the gut, why do we need a scalpel? Why do we need a surgeon to tunnel wires through my neck? Can't we access this fiber optic cable from the outside?
Well, that exact frustration, the desire to achieve these profound autonomic benefits without undergoing a $30,000 invasive surgery and receiving a permanent titanium chest implant, led directly to the development of non-invasive vagus nerve stimulation, or NVNS.
The biohacking era?
Yes.
Mm.
The biohacking renaissance we are currently experiencing is entirely predicated on bypassing the surgeon.
Let's get into the tech. The clinical data outlines two main types of NVNS. We have transcutaneous cervical VNS, or TCVNS, which is applied externally to the neck, and transcutaneous auricular VNS, or TAVNS, which is applied to the ear.
Right.
Now, the neck makes sense. The nerve is right there in the carotid sheath. But the ear, how are we stimulating a massive nerve that goes to the stomach through the skin of the ear?
It relies on a brilliant, deeply fascinating anatomical loophole.
A loophole.
Yeah. While the vast majority of the vagus nerve runs deep within the body, heavily protected by muscle and bone, there is one tiny specific exception. It's called the auricular branch of the vagus nerve.
Auricular meaning ear.
Exactly. Sometimes historically referred to as Alderman's nerve. This specific branch travels upward and surfaces right at the skin, exclusively innervating parts of the external ear.
Which parts?
Primarily the tragus, which is that little flap of cartilage right over the ear canal, and the symbiconchae, the bowl-shaped area just above it.
So it's right on the surface.
By applying an electrical current specifically to these small areas of the ear, you can successfully send a signal directly into the main trunk of the vagus nerve without ever breaking the skin.
And this isn't just theoretical wellness tech peddled by influencers on social media. The FDA has actually cleared these non-invasive devices for highly specific medical conditions.
Yes, the clinical validation for non-invasive stimulation is very strong. The FDA cleared TCVNS, the handheld device you hold against your neck, as an acute treatment for episodic migraines back in 2018.
2018, okay.
And just a year later, in 2019, it was approved as a preventative treatment for cluster headaches, which are arguably some of the most severe pain syndromes known to medicine.
And it works.
The clinical data demonstrated that applying this specific electrical stimulation to the neck could significantly decrease migraine pain levels within 60 minutes without the use of narcotics.
And looking at the 2026 wellness trends, this technology has absolutely exploded out of the neurology clinic and into the commercial market. We are seeing a massive boom of commercial wearables.
It's everywhere now.
Devices like the NeuroSim, which essentially look like a sleek, standard earbud attached to a small battery pack. They're marketed as medical-grade stimulators operating at specific clinical frequencies, usually between 20 Hz and 100 Hz. They are selling the promise that users can literally hack their autonomic nervous system, downregulate their anxiety, and improve their sleep from the comfort of their sofa.
It represents an incredible democratization of neuromodulation. The ability to shift yourself out of a sympathetic fight-or-flight state with a wearable device rather than a pill is a powerful tool for public health.
But, I hear a but.
However, as someone who studies the underlying physics, I must issue a critical analysis here. The market is currently the Wild West.
Meaning a lot of snake oil.
There is a vast, often dangerous disparity between the true clinical-grade stimulators used in FDA trials and many of the cheap commercial wellness devices flooding the internet.
What is the actual difference? An electrical current is an electrical current, isn't it? If it zaps my ear, it's stimulating the nerve?
Not at all, particularly when it comes to breaching human skin. The skin is a highly evolved, highly effective protective barrier with significant electrical impedance.
It resists electricity.
It fiercely resists it. If you just apply a raw battery current to the skin, the electricity travels across the surface of the skin, activating pain receptors, but it never penetrates deep enough to hit the nerve beneath.
So it just hurts.
Yes. Not all commercial hacks provide the sustained voltage and the highly specific complex waveforms required to overcome that impedance without burning the patient.
I was reading about the sham devices they had to build for the clinical trials, and it perfectly illustrates how precise this has to be. When researchers were testing the active NDNS devices on the neck, they had a massive problem. How do you blind a patient to an electrical shock?
It's very difficult to create a placebo for electricity.
Right. The active working device uses a highly specific high-frequency voltage, specifically a 5 kilohertz sine wave burst that lasts for exactly 1 millisecond, repeatedly.
Because the frequency is so high, it slips right through the skin barrier and hits the nerve without activating the pain receptors on the surface. The patient barely feels it.
Exactly. So to create a placebo, they had to build a sham device that delivered a lower frequency direct voltage that literally pinched and shocked the skin. They had to cause mild pain just to make the control group feel like a medical procedure was happening, while guaranteeing the electricity never reached the vagus nerve.
That detail perfectly illustrates the engineering precision required. If a commercial device you buy online doesn't have perfectly calibrated sine waves at the exact correct frequency, burst duration, and amplitude, you are not stimulating your vagus nerve.
You're just getting a buzz.
You are simply giving the skin on your ear a mild, expensive, and useless electrical shock. The hardware and software engineering behind a true clinical-grade device is highly sophisticated. It is medical equipment, not consumer electronics.
I love the idea of a wearable that acts as a volume knob for my stress. I really do. The idea of clipping something to my ear before a public speaking event and artificially slowing my heart rate is incredibly appealing.
It's very appealing.
But I have to ask the philosophical question. We are essentially plugging our nervous system into an app. We are outsourcing our emotional regulation to a lithium-ion battery. Is there a danger in relying on an external device to do what our bodies evolved to do naturally? Are we going to lose the ability to calm ourselves down?
This raises an intensely important question about somatic autonomy.
Somatic autonomy.
Somatic autonomy is the idea that you have sovereign control over your own physiological state. While the technology is an incredible life-saving tool, especially for clinical populations suffering from severe trauma or dysautonomia, it absolutely shouldn't replace our intrinsic capacity for self-regulation.
We should be able to do it ourselves.
And that pivots our conversation perfectly. Because long before we had titanium chest implants, neurocybernetic processes, or Bluetooth earbuds, human beings evolved highly effective, completely natural methods to stimulate the vagus nerve using absolutely no electricity at all.
Let's get into the natural hacks. Because if this nerve is a two-way street, we must have built-in levers we can pull.
We do.
The data details several free biological methods to trigger this nerve, starting with the most fundamental human action, the breath. Specifically, diaphragmatic or paced breathing. I understand breathing brings in oxygen, but how does simply breathing deeply interact with the cranial nerve?
It comes back to the deep anatomy we discussed at the very beginning. As the vagus nerve travels down through the thorax into the abdomen, it passes directly through the diaphragm.
Which is the massive sheet of muscle that separates your chest from your stomach.
Yes. The tissue of the diaphragm is densely packed with vagal mechanoreceptors.
What is a mechanoreceptor exactly?
It's a specialized sensory nerve ending that detects mechanical stretch, pressure, or distortion. When you engage in deep, slow, diaphragmatic breathing, meaning you are expanding your belly outward rather than just taking shallow breaths into your upper chest, you physically pull and stretch the diaphragm muscle.
Okay, so you're stretching the tissue.
This mechanical stretching physically distorts the mechanoreceptors. That distortion pops open ion channels in the cells, which instantly fires an electrical signal up the afferent vagal fibers to the NTS and the brainstem.
The train leaves the station.
Exactly. The signal essentially says the diaphragm is moving slowly and deeply. Therefore, we are not running from a predator, we are safe. Initiate the parasympathetic rest and digest response.
It's purely mechanical. You are physically pulling on the biological lever that calms the brain down. The brain has no choice but to respond to the physical stretch of the muscle.
It is forced to relax.
The research also highlights vocalization, humming, singing, and chanting.
Yes, and the mechanism is similarly anatomical and mechanical. The vagus nerve heavily innervates the muscles of the larynx and the pharynx, your vocal cords, and the back of your throat.
Okay.
When you hum at a low pitch, sing, or chant, you create a sustained physical vibration in the vocal cords. Because these tissues are directly connected to the vagus nerve, that continuous vibration acts as a literal internal mechanical massage for the nerve fibers.
Wow.
The mechanoreceptors in the throat pick up the vibration and send an immediate, powerful safety signal to the brainstem.
It makes me think about ancient human traditions. Yogic breathing, pranayama, monks chanting Om in deep meditation, the rhythmic singing in religious ceremonies across almost every culture on Earth.
They all share this core physiological trait.
These practices existed millennia before we had fMRI machines or knew what a neurotransmitter was. They accidentally discovered vagus nerve stimulation just by observing what made the human body feel centered and safe.
Exactly. They discovered the user manual for the human autonomic nervous system through centuries of trial and error. They found the inputs that generate peace.
That is beautiful.
And there's one more highly effective, deeply physiological hack that relies on ancient evolutionary biology: cold water exposure. Specifically, splashing freezing cold water directly onto your face.
The mammalian dive reflex. I love this one because it sounds like a superpower.
It essentially is a biological superpower. When you expose your face, particularly the highly sensitive area around your eyes and cheeks, to extremely cold water, It triggers the mammalian dive reflex.
What is that?
This is an ancient evolutionary adaptation found in all mammals, designed to heavily conserve oxygen when abruptly submerged in freezing water.
How does the vagus nerve fit into a diving reflex?
The moment the ice water hits your face, the trigeminal nerve, which is another cranial nerve that senses facial temperature, fires an emergency signal to the brainstem.
Okay, emergency signal.
The brainstem instantly activates the efferent, downward-traveling fibers of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve dumps acetylcholine directly onto the heart's pacemaker, rapidly and forcefully lowering your heart rate.
To save oxygen.
Yes. It simultaneously downregulates your sympathetic arousal. It is an immediate biological hard reset. If you are in the middle of a spiraling panic attack, plunging your face into a bowl of ice water forces your biology to override your psychology.
It's like finding out that the cheat codes to a video game were written on the controller the whole time. We just didn't know which buttons to press.
They were always right there.
We can physically stretch our diaphragm to force calm. We can vibrate our vocal cords to massage the nerve. We can shock our trigeminal nerve with ice water to force a system reboot.
This profound synthesis of ancient somatic practice and modern, hard neuroscience is the core of what is known as polyvagal theory.
Polyvagal theory.
Formulated by Dr. Stephen Porges. Polyvagal theory explains how our autonomic nervous system evolved over millions of years to keep us safe, and how the vagus nerve is the literal biological substrate of our ability to connect socially, love, and regulate our deepest emotions.
It's the physical hardware of empathy and calm.
By understanding this complex biology, we finally achieve true somatic autonomy. We are no longer passive victims of our anxiety or our stress response. We possess the hard knowledge to actively intervene and shift our physiological state at will.
So we've covered the entire spectrum today. Between the $30,000 titanium chest implants wiring electricity into the carotid sheath, the precisely calibrated transcutaneous ear clips firing sine waves, the deep diaphragmatic breathing, and the freezing cold water splashes. What is the ultimate takeaway for the listener today? For the person who just wants to feel a little less overwhelmed by the sheer velocity of the modern world?
The ultimate takeaway is a message of profound, actionable empowerment. The deep science of the vagus nerve definitively proves that the mind and the body are not separate, isolated entities.
They aren't disconnected.
They are not a dualism. They are one continuous bidirectional loop. Your anxiety, your chronic stress, your depression.
Yeah.
These are not just abstract, invisible mental concepts occurring in a psychological vacuum.
Right.
They are deeply physical states, rooted in the actual biology of your organs and nerves.
Right.
By learning to speak the physical language of the vagus nerve, whether you choose to do that through advanced bioelectronic technology, traditional somatic therapy, or simply by taking conscious control of your own diaphragm, you gain the tangible power to rewrite your emotional reality. You possess a biological reset button.
You carry that reset button with you everywhere you go. We spend our whole lives trying to think our way out of stress, using our brains to fix our brains. We overanalyze, we obsess, we worry, we try to logic our way into feeling calm. But if the vast majority of the vagus nerve's traffic, that massive 80% of the fiber optic cable, is moving upward from the body to the brain, maybe the secret to peace of mind isn't in your head at all. Maybe true mental health starts in the rhythmic beating of your heart, the physical expansion of your lungs, and the quiet murmurs of your gut. Next time you take a deep breath, ask yourself who is really in charge. Take care of yourselves and keep diving deep.